The Galactic Confederacy's archives labeled humanity with quiet finality, an emotionally volatile, post-traumatic species with a historically excessive aversion to conflict. That assessment wasn't theoretical, it was peer-reviewed, filed, and disseminated among the dominant powers of the Orion Arm. The humans were newcomers to the stars, awkward in their diplomacy, slow to mobilize, and obsessed with psychological caution. Every major power, from the coldly logical Valari to the war-bred Zarn Dominion, drew the same conclusion. They feared war. It wasn't just history. It was pattern. Human media was steeped in narratives of destruction, regret, and survival. Their great wars, two world-shattering events within the same century, left such psychological scarring that nearly every cultural pillar was built on ensuring they never repeated it. Films, songs, literature, all riddled with trauma, anti-war messaging, and emotional processing. Their military traditions, while sophisticated, emphasized rules of engagement, proportionality, and exhausting every diplomatic avenue before force. To a galaxy forged by conquest and sustained by hierarchical conflict, this wasn't a virtue. It was weakness. The Zarn in particular were quick to capitalize. A species whose evolution was bound to endless internal culling and external domination, they saw humanity's restraint as evolutionary stagnation. Their own philosophers had no term for mercy until it was translated into their war code files by linguists studying Terran speech. To them, mercy was irrational, unsustainable. A Zarn warthinker named S.H. Valker delivered a widely circulated address before the Confederacy Council. Humanity carries the burden of fire they refuse to use. They are afraid of the power in their own blood. They fear war because it reveals them, makes them into monsters they know they are. The statement was met with applause. The Confederacy codified the sentiment with a subtle designation. Cautionary tier, species likely to fold under extended militarized pressure. Even Earth's earliest contact missions reinforced this view. The humans sent scientists, teachers, cultural observers. Their ships were slow, heavily shielded, and unarmed. They shared data. They offered translations of their languages freely, seeded cultural exchanges, provided vast knowledge of agricultural techniques and medicine. Their military representatives were few, polite, almost ceremonial. When a border dispute emerged on the fringe of Zarn and human space over the mineral-rich Makuth expanse, observers assumed humanity would delay. Prolonged negotiations. Appealed to the Confederacy for mediation. Instead, they did nothing. They didn't call for aid. Didn't retaliate. Didn't even protest. They simply fell silent. Zarn fleet movements increased. Colonies in contested space were swallowed by expansion patrols. Zarn media mocked the lack of resistance. Human response: no broadcasts. No diplomatic protests. No repositioning of major fleet assets. Instead, high-resolution images of Earth's war memorials circulated online, showing sculptures of faceless soldiers and endless rows of headstones. No caption. No context. Galactic interpreters misread this as passive grief. In reality, the silence was tectonic. The mistake wasn't that humans feared war. The mistake was assuming that fear implied paralysis. That it meant surrender. The truth was never that clean. Humanity feared war because they understood it, intimately, bitterly, and at scale no species had ever survived self-inflicted. They didn't weep over violence. They remembered it. And those memories were not myths or simulations. They were real, buried beneath continents, and still encoded in the collective psyche of every nation. But from outside, it all appeared meek. Predictable. A hesitant prey species among predators. The Zarn called them the fire-starved. Their strategists mocked the antiquated ethics of human command protocols. Whole think tanks were constructed around counter-human warfare. The popular conclusion: psychological collapse within 30 cycles of pressure. A calculated scenario: start small, escalate gradually, apply pressure without forcing them into direct confrontation. The assumption: they'd crumble before they retaliated. What they failed to see was that no species had ever forced humanity to show restraint for this long. That silence was not absence, it was preparation. Every Terran president, general, diplomat, and systems AI was waiting, not because they were unsure, but because the moment humanity responded, it would be irrevocable. A turning point not just in tactics, but in the moral direction of their species. For all their emotional fluency, the aliens missed the simplest truth. Humans did not fear war itself. They feared what it would require them to become. The first colony fell without resistance. Communications cut, infrastructure dismantled, population relocated or missing. The official report from the Zarn Dominion framed it as a territorial reclamation, a necessary step to secure vital resources in an ungoverned sector. The Galactic Confederacy issued a mild condemnation. Humanity did not respond. 2 more colonies followed. Still nothing. The Zarn interpreted this as affirmation. Human fear had paralyzed them. Their silence, a kind of diplomatic submission. Zarn commanders grew emboldened, promoting officers based on efficiency and suppressing lightly defended human settlements. They published metrics. Threat mitigation efficiency, 92%. Human resistance index, negligible. Across the Dominion, broadcasts celebrated a bloodless victory. The fire-starved have no flame, announced one military newscast. They do not fight because they cannot. The illusion was perfect. Human trade routes remained stable. Their embassy staff offered no statements. No military deployments appeared on known scans. No rallies, no propaganda, not even protest. But beneath that surface, signals were shifting. Terran intelligence decommissioned all diplomatic outposts within contested space. Civilian satellites were deorbited under the guise of maintenance. Artificial weather systems over agricultural planets began testing disruption frequencies under classified directives. Personnel rotations accelerated for ships with stealth class designations. And still, nothing was said. Then the Icarus Accord, a treaty negotiated years earlier between Earth and the Valari, was invoked. A clause buried in technical jargon allowed for mutual information exchange in pre-hostile conditions. Suddenly, Zarn patrols encountered Valari vessels shadowing them along the rim, observing, but never intervening. The Dominion took this as caution. It was surveillance. The first counter-strike came with no warning, no declaration. A Zarn logistics freighter vanished en route to the occupied colony of Elian 4. Search beacons found only frozen fragments drifting in a precise spherical pattern, no radiation signature, no debris field, no distress signal logged. 2 days later, a forward operating base on Varix 9 lost all power. Backup systems failed to activate. When a recon squad landed, they found every soldier in cryostasis pods, sealed and labeled in Terran Standard. Not a single casualty. But the command center's mainframe had been gutted. Stripped clean. Panic didn't set in immediately. The Zarn leadership chalked it up to anomalies, maybe sabotage by sympathizers. But the tempo changed. Convoy disruptions increased. Drones jammed without known interference. Communications between fleet elements saw delay patterns consistent with advanced spoofing tactics. When 2 Zarn cruisers collided mid-maneuver, both having received identical NAV path updates, the Dominion launched an internal inquiry. That inquiry never concluded. A Zarn general, Tar Kolmarn, publicly demanded answers. Within 48 hours, his ship disappeared. No message. No explosion. Only a brief, corrupted audio clip leaked from the central relay station, heavy breathing, then silence. Dominion analysts tried scrubbing the waveform, only to find it embedded with a Terran data packet containing a single phrase, asterisk. You moved first. Now we move last. Asterisk. From that point forward, the pattern became undeniable. Human presence was invisible but absolute. Every Zarn military initiative, in contested space, met an unseen wall. Entire battalions reported corrupted navigation. Planetary defense grids misfired. Data cores spontaneously wiped themselves mid-access. Not one human fleet was seen. Not one demand issued. They were not engaging in war. They were executing a strategic redirection of reality. Zarn command centers began implementing contingency protocols, elevating threat status to high alert, scrambling their own signals to avoid internal compromise. But the damage was done. Psychological strain fractured the morale of their mid-tier officers. Soldiers began refusing assignments near the frontier. Recruitment dropped. Tactical advisors recommended diplomatic outreach. But the Dominion was proud. To admit error would destabilize its core worlds. Instead, they escalated. They sent 4 dreadnoughts into Terran-claimed space. Accompanied by elite Zarnvoy troopers, the fleet was meant to force a confrontation. It didn't reach its destination. 63 minutes into transit, all vessels lost contact. Surveillance stations reported seeing a black arc sweep across their sector, like a bend in starlight. After that, nothing. The Confederacy received a message from Earth. Plain, unencrypted, delivered in every known language. Asterisk. This is not retaliation. This is realignment. Remove yourselves, or we will finish rewriting the balance you distorted. Asterisk. It was the first human communication since the incursions began. The Confederacy debated intervention. Some argued for censure, others for negotiations. But the facts were clear. The Zarn had overstepped. Humanity had not retaliated in rage, but in terrifying precision. They had not sought war, but the moment it began, they dictated its boundaries. And they did so without ever being seen. The Dominion called for reinforcements. 3 fleets were redirected from secure sectors, bringing firepower sufficient to level continents. Their objective: decapitate human command structures in one decisive stroke. But as the ships advanced, they found only silence, no defense platforms, no energy signatures, no life signs. What they did find was absence. Empty orbital rings where colonies had once been. Communication buoys transmitting nothing but static. Planets sterilized without visible damage, infrastructure intact but abandoned. No scorched earth, no battlefields. Just vacancy, surgical and total. In one operation, the Zarn command base on Kirill 6 detected a spike in gravitational flux. Within minutes, every automated turret pivoted inward and self-fired. The core systems had been rewritten. Not hacked. Rewritten star. The Dominion deployed isolation teams. They found no intruders, only their own AI cores pulsing with a new command. We warned you. Captured Zarn soldiers began reporting hallucinations. Not chemical, psychological. Messages etched into their HUDs that only they could see. Audio loops that bypassed equipment and whispered old Earth dialects directly into their minds. In every instance, one phrase repeated, You escalated. Then the equipment failed. No evidence. No data. Just trauma. Stories surfaced from neutral traders. Human strike craft had been spotted, sleek, unregistered, silent. No emissions, no exhaust trails. They didn't chase. They observed. Watching convoys pass, then vanishing before sensors recalibrated. A rumor spread among Dominion pilots: if you saw a Terran ship and lived, it meant they didn't care about you yet. In less than one cycle, 17 Zarn outposts went dark. No survivors. No remains. Only the same repeated sequence left in backup data cores, system access from within the encryption layer itself. It was as if human code had predated the systems it breached. Not hacking. Pre-writing. The Dominion still refused to yield. They increased occupation forces in the outer colonies, deploying ground troops with shock cannons and orbital support. The result was identical. Empty towns. Power grids intact. Food still cooking on stoves. Not a single civilian corpse. But their soldiers disappeared. Entire squads gone. Bio-trackers showed no conflict, no resistance. One by one, their signals blinked out. Then came the artifacts. Precision-delivered crates to Zarn diplomatic embassies across neutral systems. Inside each, a helmet, scorched and marked with Zarn insignia. Human dog tags attached. A small data cube with one message, asterisk. Send fewer next time. Asterisk. For the first time, the Confederacy demanded a war tribunal. The Dominion refused, claiming human aggression, but offered no proof. Every attempt to document an incursion failed. Human vessels didn't leave sensor trails. Human soldiers didn't leave bodies. Human AI didn't announce their presence, they simply rewrote systems and left. One high-level Dominion analyst defected. Her debriefing was leaked. They don't wage war. They unmake intent. Every move you make becomes yours alone. There is no engagement. There is only consequence. Psychological collapse followed. Dominion recruits began resigning en masse. Commanders spoke in riddles. Some reported dreams of Terran history, waking with visions of mushroom clouds and burning skies. Others simply refused orders. One dreadnought crew jettisoned themselves into vacuum rather than approach the edge of Terran space. In desperation, the Dominion launched a preemptive strike on Earth's lunar relay. Missiles disappeared mid-flight. Hours later, their own military archive servers began playing human news footage from the 21st century, cities falling, tanks rolling, sirens wailing. No narration. Just raw sound. Zarn systems failed to block the feed. Then came a news signal, asterisk. You wanted war. This is not war. This is what comes after. Asterisk. No demand for surrender followed. No terms. Just quiet. One by one, Dominion shipyards suffered cascade failures. Civilian broadcast networks looped images of Terran war memorials. Social systems turned inward. Paranoia flourished. Diplomats called for withdrawal. The galaxy began to understand. Humanity's silence wasn't strategic ambiguity. It was surgical inevitability. When war was chosen for them, they didn't react emotionally. They dismantled the context that allowed it to begin. The Dominion attempted final escalation, planetary bombardment of a fringe Terran colony. They launched 3 barrages. Only the launch data existed. No impacts. No energy returns. Nothing touched the surface. All the missiles vanished. Ground scans confirmed. No explosions, no damage. Only a new satellite, unmarked, now in orbit, transmitting nothing. By then, the phrase was common even in civilian speech across sectors, asterisk. Humans don't retaliate. They erase permission. Asterisk. The war had already ended. The Dominion just hadn't realized yet. Zarn Prime initiated full defensive lockdown. Orbital shields were raised for the first time in over 2 centuries. Civilian travel was suspended, diplomatic links severed. Entire fleets were pulled back to defend the core world, abandoning outer territories without notice. They believed a human offensive was imminent. They were correct, but not in the way they understood warfare. No fleets appeared. No approach vectors registered. Instead, systems failed in sequence. Orbital sensors lost alignment. Weather satellites began transmitting Earth's atmospheric data instead of local metrics. Power grids overloaded with undetectable surges. The command AI refused override, citing a non-existent priority code, asterisk. Directive, Resolution 1A. Asterisk. No such directive existed in Zarn protocols. It did in Terran archives, declassified, decades old, and never shared. The Dominion attempted manual reboots. Physical access failed. Facilities were locked down internally. Doors refused to open. Ventilation halted in research sectors. Emergency generators detonated in synchronized failure. Not a single shot fired, yet the capital's infrastructure collapsed like a decaying skeleton. 42 minutes later, every orbital cannon pivoted away from the sky and pointed directly downward. Human vessels remained out of range. They never breached orbit. They didn't need to. The High War Council convened in the Citadel bunker beneath the capital. Panic had eroded the last illusion of superiority. They debated surrender. Some demanded retaliation, but no one could define a target. Earth never broadcast coordinates. Human command was decentralized, distributed, anonymous. Every Dominion infiltration attempt returned the same result: false access granted, then silent infection. Their spies didn't go missing, they went mad. A signal was received. Not via standard channels. It came through the capital's emergency civil broadcast network, used only for planetary disasters. Every screen flickered on. A single line of text appeared, translated perfectly into native syntax: asterisk. This is the final notice. We do not destroy the innocent to punish the guilty. But we will remove what you refuse to fix. Asterisk. No image. No voice. No demand. Just that sentence. Repeated twice. Then static. Within minutes, the orbital cannons powered down. The atmosphere cooled. Artificial weather recalibrated to ideal growing conditions. Hospitals came back online. Civilian power restored. Military systems remained locked out. Nothing else followed. Tsarn leadership hesitated. They waited for the second blow. There wasn't one. Human forces had halted the collapse just short of irreversible damage. The Dominion remained intact, but paralyzed. No casualties. No scorched cities. But total control had been proven. The Confederacy sent envoys to Earth requesting mediation. Earth responded once, briefly, asterisk. The matter is closed. We expect no further disturbance. Asterisk. No reparations. No annexations. No public demands. They left the space they had entered without leaving monuments, flags, or outposts. Just silence. Galactic networks lit up with debate. Some believed it was mercy. Others, a psychological strategy to instill permanent uncertainty. But those who analyzed the outcome in detail came to a different conclusion. Humans had achieved absolute dominance without declaring war, firing en masse, or occupying territory. They demonstrated capability, restraint, and finality. Dominion scholars struggled to explain it. For a species that thrived on clear conquest hierarchies, the concept of punishment without destruction was alien. Their people now lived with the awareness that survival had been granted, not earned. An unmarked Terran drone remained in orbit over Zarn Prime, silent, its purpose unknown. It transmitted no data. Responded to no query. But every 72 hours, it aligned to the capital and pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Military recruitment across the Dominion dropped by 78%. A generation raised on conquest now whispered of ghosts and black ships and soldiers who never spoke. The fear wasn't of weapons, but of humans simply choosing to look their way again. Other empires took notice. Treaties were rewritten. War doctrines revised. Even aggressive species began to simulate Terran engagement scenarios, and lost. Repeatedly. Humanity never clarified their technology. They offer no insight, no doctrine, no philosophy. They simply returned to their original borders, resumed civilian operations, and refused all inquiries. Their message had been made with no celebration, no ceremony. They had drawn the line. Enforced it. Then walked away. And in doing so, they changed the language of war across the stars. The Confederacy convened an emergency review. Every file on humanity was reopened. Previous assessments were discarded. New classifications were proposed, debated, and ultimately merged into a single term: apex deterrent species. Not because of weaponry, but because of behavioral unpredictability paired with overwhelming control. The final report was authored not by a politician or a military strategist, but a behavioral archivist from the Arlon Archive Nexus. Her conclusion was concise: asterisk. They do not escalate. They correct. Not for territory, not for ego. For alignment. Asterisk. The Dominion's official position was silence. No formal apology. No retaliation. No further claims. They had nothing to say because the outcome left no leverage. Entire sectors had been lost, not to occupation, but to uncertainty. The galaxy no longer measured power in dreadnoughts and armies. It now measured it in who could win a war without needing to wage one. Delegates from over a dozen civilizations quietly requested Earth's attendance at diplomatic summits. Earth declined most. When representatives were sent, they arrived without escorts. No fleets. No fanfare. Their only message, asterisk. We seek quiet. We respond to disruption. Asterisk. In cultural circles, humanity became mythic. Stories exaggerated, details embellished. But one element remained consistent. Humans never declared war, and they never explained what would happen if forced to fight. That ambiguity became more terrifying than any weapon. Private research into human psychology skyrocketed. Every known war in their past was reanalyzed through the lens of containment rather than conquest. Analysts found a pattern not in aggression, but in calculated restraint, always escalation only after lines were crossed repeatedly and peace rejected. The phrase, "They fear what war makes of them," became central to understanding their decisions. It was no longer viewed as cowardice but as the most dangerous awareness of all, the recognition that victory often costs more than any species should be willing to pay. In one unauthorized broadcast leaked from the old Tsar military archives, a Dominion captain described the moment they realized it was over. Asterisk. It wasn't the loss of systems. It was the absence of gloating. There were no threats. No ultimatums. They dismantled our ability to fight and expected nothing in return. I don't think they hate us. I think they've outgrown needing to. Asterisk. No one challenged humanity again. Not because of treaties, but because the galaxy now had a precedent. War with Earth didn't end in destruction. It ended in silence, the kind that stripped away illusions of power. That silence lingered. Not threatening, just present, like gravity. On Earth, there were no celebrations. No medals. Veterans returned home and resumed their lives. Children played beneath peaceful skies. The event was marked not by parades, but by a single update to Terran defense protocols, asterisk. Response threshold adjusted. No longer reactive. Now discretionary. Asterisk. The Confederacy quietly restructured its strategic doctrine. Influence models changed. Alliances once built around aggression shifted toward containment. Species once proud of their might now invested in diplomacy first, not out of morality, but survival instinct. The last page of the review stated what no one had admitted publicly, asterisk. Humans won not because they are violent. They won because they remember what it took to survive being violent. That memory is deeper than genetics. It shapes everything they do. That is their advantage. That is what makes them the end of war. Asterisk. Among neutral observers, there remained one unanswered question: why didn't humanity take more? With the Dominion vulnerable, Earth could have expanded, rewritten borders, restructured the galactic balance. They didn't. They returned to normalcy as if none of it had happened. One theory persisted, that humanity's goal was never to dominate, but to avoid the burden of having to again. That by stopping the war without claiming spoils, they denied its utility to everyone watching. The drone left orbit 6 months later. No message. No signal. It simply disengaged and slipped into deep space, destination unknown. In its absence, the Dominion began to rebuild, slower, quieter, more cautiously. No longer feared, but tolerated. Their broadcasts shifted from conquest to internal repair. It was not forgiveness. It was allowance. And across the stars, every empire that once saw humanity as fragile now marked them differently. Not as predators. Not as conquerors. But as the thing you never forced to respond. Because once they did, it was already finished.